know who has access to what? This is the Identity at the Center podcast. If you're looking for identity and access management talk, you've come to the right place. And now, on to the show.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I am Jeff, and that's Jim.
I'm Jim.
You are Jim.
I am. Jeff, where are you today?
I am in scenic Monterrey, Mexico again, admiring the tall mountains and the 70 degrees. That is much better than the 20 degrees that I have at home in Chicago area and the snow on the ground. So I'm pleased about that turn of events right there.
All of those that are freezing our butts off in the continental U.S. really feel sorry for you.
I'm sure you do. It's my first world problem of the day. But I will try to suffer through it on behalf of you and everyone else listening.
We are ultimately grateful. Never-ending gratitude. Yes.
I'm sure you are.
So, Jeff, we have Gartner coming up in a couple of weeks. Is it okay to tease our next podcast topic?
Yes, I think we've got a few. I think in the spirit of Thanksgiving, we're going to try to figure out maybe something like what are we thankful for in an IAM world? Maybe for the next episode, and then start getting into Gartner sessions and what we're both looking forward to in the conference. How's that sound?
Right. Sounds good. And the other thing that I'm going to be studying up on, or not studying up on, because I'm pretty tuned into it, is CARTA. CARTA stands for Continuous Adaptive Risk and Trust Assessment. And Gartner's been putting a lot of focus on this framework and way to think about continuous authentication, continuous assessment of the person who's logged in and making sure that, you're really still the same person, and when to step up in authentication, things like that, even if it's in the middle of a session. So I'm really interested to learn a lot about that while we're at the conference, but I want to try to, learn as much as possible. I've already found a pretty good presentation that was available for free online. Maybe we can add the URL to the show notes, but just something that I'm kind of tuned into. I want to spend as much time during the conference going to sessions that revolve around that. And like I said, I want to kind of get studied up on it before we go.
So have you already started to map out which sessions you want to attend?
Yes. I've done my entire agenda. So
have you really? Well, then I stink because I haven't even looked at it yet.
Yeah. And a lot of the sessions which you have to register for are already booked up or sold out, or however you want to put it. But so you're probably going to suffer from the same thing that you suffered from last time you were at Gartner, which we talked about on one of our previous podcasts, which is you have to get in and kind of register before you show up, or all those sessions will be sold out and booked up, and you won't get into all the sessions that you want. Fortunately, there's still tons of sessions out there, so I wouldn't be too worried about it.
Yeah, I feel like if you don't get in early, you don't get them. You don't get into some of those. And I have a totally unfounded conspiracy theory, totally not based on any fact, that they reserve some of those seats for some of their other customers and other people who maybe might be VIPs.
VIPs, right?
Things might not be as available as they look like, or they're locked out for some sort of pre-sale type activity.
Right.
That's totally a conspiracy theory. I have no idea if that's true. That's just going to be my excuse as to why I couldn't get into something. It's not total. It's not that I totally haven't looked at it yet, and I have no idea what's going on yet for Gartner. That could.
It sounds like Jeff. It sounds like sour grapes.
Sour grapes. Yeah.
Sour grapes conspiracy theory. You have no proof, but that's okay. You could be spot on still. Yeah. Just because it's sour grapes doesn't mean it's not true.
Yeah, this is true. So I feel like you're helping me and you're an enabler, and I appreciate that.
So we want to talk IAM strategy, right?
I think so. That's what we do, right?
That is the emphasis of this podcast. So I've been just, I think every week when we do this podcast is like we have a week of project work that we worked on, and some things are hot, some topics. So it's not always going to be a timely topic. It might just be a general topic or something that we spent a lot of time thinking about the last week. So centered these on IAM strategy and just kind of some big ideas that I'm going to throw out there that I would love to hear kind of your feedback on. Um, One of those is, I've been thinking about I'm always thinking about how do you justify an IAM program? How do you make a business case for it? And always go back to kind of my MBA training, if you will, and kind of the idea that there's three things that can justify an investment. It's um, increase revenue, decrease cost, or reduction of risk. And so you kind of tend to get into, when it comes to reduction in cost, you kind of get into that mindset of we want to reduce costs going forward. So one way to justify an IAM program is to say reduce the cost of running your current technology or fewer help desk calls, things like that. Well, what I want to do, like my big idea, and really what I've run into recently is cost avoidance. And if you can, find a situation where potentially your IAM program helps you avoid tech debt type solutions where you're having to do some kind of workaround or a temporary IAM solution, something that becomes a throwaway, that can be something that can help, you know, improve your business case or make your
Mhm.
business case for you, or, definitely contribute to why it makes sense to make your investments sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to quote one of my favorite people, Bert Carroll. Used to work for him way back in the day, and he used to say, "I'm totally going to butcher this, but there's nothing so permanent as something that's temporary without an end date." Right. So, if you're developing something that's a stopgap, and there isn't a clear plan as to what is what is the real plan behind it, you may end up getting stuck with it. And I think we've seen that with a couple of recent clients we're working with, and just over time, people kind of get stuck into this. Well, we built it, and this is just the way it is now.
Right. Yeah. And so this particular client has a major strategic platform that they've already invested in, right? But they don't have the IAM tools to kind of support it. So in order to really use this strategic platform, they have to have a way to get people into the system. They're going to have to set up, an authentication scheme. It's going to be a lot of throwaway work for when the IAM system comes along. And so being greenfield is like the perfect time because you don't have to set up any of that throwaway work. My bigger concern is it's like not only do you have that cost avoidance, you've got these folks from the application team supporting this new greenfield technology who are on board and want IAM. And how often do you see where people put these throwaway solutions in and then fall in love with them and they say, the throwaway solutions, like everything, like your IAM solution is going to have to do everything that the throwaway solution does and more. And they potentially could turn from advocates of your IAM system to, opponents of it. So, um, that greenfield situation, I wouldn't say is extremely common, but, somebody out there might be listening who's in the same kind of situation and, thinking of cost avoidance as a way to justify IAM spend is, it's very real. It's something that financially minded people will get, right? And usually when you're making a business case, it ultimately rolls up to people who, don't really love or aren't technophiles, right? They just want to understand if this is a good place to spend money from an investment standpoint or not.
Yeah, and sometimes IM spend can be pretty big, so you kind of have to balance that out. There may be times where you just don't have the funding to spend what you want to spend to actually fix the problem, and then you start to have to figure out what are the workarounds, and that's where stopgap solutions come up most often, at least from my experience.
Right. Yeah, and so along the lines, so the second big idea is along the lines of that making a business case and the increasing of revenue is rare, extremely rare. It's probably never happened that implementing an IAM system in and of itself helped increase revenue. However, if there's a strategic initiative that does increase revenue and IAM is a vital component to that, you can take partial credit. And somehow, and maybe you want to work with your leadership team to figure out how you present that case. But to me, IAM as an enabler is an enabler of that example I gave earlier, where there's a greenfield technology and you know that team needs IAM or they're going to have to build workarounds. But even bigger initiatives where companies are deploying a portal or some kind of um, web e-commerce site where they need a way to have people register and manage their password and authenticate and maybe do multi-factor, you know, setting up that business case where IAM is a crucial component to that, an enabler of a much larger business activity. It really brings IAM to light as a business enabler.
Yeah, I guess if you're doing it right, you're collecting enough information around the users to be able to further fine tune your offering, right? Whatever that may be, based on whatever attributes. And this is, something a lot of e-com companies will work through. Is here's Jeff, and he went to Amazon and he clicked on this and he clicked on that. So he might be interested in this. Send him a coupon for that because that might inspire him to buy more. Spend differently. Those are all different things that could be enabled, but without knowing who I am and having my identity, managed in a very tight and controlled way, that sort of information is almost impossible to get.
Right. And there are a lot of consumer IAM solutions out there today, like uh, SAP and their solution used to be Giga. That's one that is really focused on that consumer IAM e-commerce type experience where, um, you know, just as much of the product I would say is about gathering customer data and customer intelligence as it is about kind of traditional authentication, registration, et cetera. Even though it's usually baked into those things, it's important data that you can start to use our artificial intelligence and machine learning to start to build some, personal uh, trends that people are, doing within your applications.
Yeah, I think it'll be fascinating to see what some of these large e-com, retailers, what their data looks like around your personal identity.
Right.
Google has it buried deep within your settings. You can export it, but you can see, what it thinks your interests are, and it's pretty pretty granular, as far as what sports teams do you look up, and what are the different types of technologies you're interested in, or movies or TV shows, et cetera. All that's just data, right? That for them is valuable from an advertising perspective. Um, and if they have enough of that information on people, they can make that product even better. So, I feel like Google is one of the companies that does IAM really well. Obviously, they've got a strong platform and it's out there. They're up there with, Microsoft and um, Amazon and, Apple as far as sort of the big dogs, Facebook and Twitter as well. Um, but with things like GDPR, all these companies now, all that data that is collected about you is a lot easier to find. And most companies now have a way to export it out. So being able to manage that is a huge part of being able to be compliant with regulations, et cetera, in addition to being able to target your products.
Yeah, absolutely. So the third kind of big idea that I wanted to talk about is just not being myopic. Not only looking at your specific needs, especially when you're trying to put your business case together for IAM, but being able to talk about what are the trends in your industry, what are the trends in the world at large that could affect you and your organization. Things like what you brought up with the privacy regulations. You know, I was watching a video today on, and I got into blockchain, and it started, but the term that was being used for it was decentralized identity. It's
Yep.
starting to get traction. So that was our last podcast. But you know, just for anybody out there who's been thinking about that and is excited about it, remember that term, decentralized identity. And when I went back through my Gartner registration, they have a meeting, they have one of the sessions on decentralized identity. It's not called blockchain, but 10 to 1, that's exactly what they're talking about. And so I heard the speaker make the statement that privacy is a basic human right. And I thought about that, and it's like that's a concept that is just probably starting to get a foothold. I mean, I remember being at an IAM conference and a speaker saying, "You have no expectation of privacy."
Right.
It was the exact opposite view, which is that if you want to use the internet, you want to use our website, you have no expectation of privacy. We can do whatever we want with your data. Well, the tide is shifting now. Anyway, so those are some of the bigger one. That's one of the bigger trends. Another bigger trend is just data breaches. I mean, you hear about a new data breach every week, it seems like, and those data breaches are costing companies their reputation, and they're costing them a lot of money.
Yeah, I feel like what you were just talking about with the right to privacy and the right to, or maybe the not right to privacy. I feel like I fall maybe more into the former camp, meaning if I'm going to take advantage of services, I expect that I'm going to have to trade some of my privacy to use that service. Now, I expect that the service that I'm using will protect my information, and they will, take reasonable steps to make sure that it remains secure and that I have a way to manage it. But I fall more into the camp that, at least my current thought is, and this is always subject to change, is that I expect to trade privacy for some service. If the product is free, you're the product. It's kind of the way I look at it. Google doesn't make Gmail for free because they like you. They want your information so that you can become the product, and they can, theoretically anonymize your information and then make it part of some sort of ad spend that a company would make, targeting people like me for whatever that reason may be. And I feel okay with that because I feel like those are the services that I want to use. I'm probably fine with that. If I wasn't, then I would change my service to something else.
Yeah, what if the service is not free? And what if you go to the website that says, by continuing on, you agree to our privacy policy, and the privacy policy says that we may share your data with third parties. And then when you look to see what website it is, it's a utility or it's your bank. And it's just some very broad privacy statement that you don't necessarily agree with, but the reality of it is that you need electric in your house, and you need to pay your bills, so you set up automatic payments. You shouldn't have to. My opinion is you shouldn't have to live like um, a hobbit, or like the
Tin,
Unabomber,
tinfoil hats.
in order to pay your bills online.
Yeah.
I don't see why
I,
you should have to agree to that.
Yeah, I think where there's competition, I think that there is better. But when you get locked into a service, that is definitely a slippery slope. And I don't know if I'm the right person to be having that conversation with, but
True,
I certainly
and I think
understand where that's coming. I see where you're coming from, and I agree with it. They're just, the data needs to be protected, no matter who's
one of
doing
the things I say a lot to our clients is that I've worked with clients over time, and you go into I think we even talked about this at one time. The client that their whole IAM house is kind of gated. They haven't invested appropriately in IAM, but their privilege access management system is like world class. And you're like, what happened? Oh, we got breached. Um, and I think this whole privacy conversation goes back to that too. It's like now enough privacy abuses have happened that people take it seriously. And, there's a GDPR and there's a California Consumer Privacy Act. And it's because companies have gone too far
that,
and
or
they've
they
abused
failed to secure the
people's
data as they should have.
basic right to privacy. Basic, I think there's probably things that we could all agree to, that if you don't want to read eBay's 20 pages of privacy, if they send you, hey, we updated our privacy, you get that 5 times 6 times a year, and you want to go out there and read for 20 minutes, You just want to be able to use that service. At the same time, you don't want them to just give your email address out to everybody. It's just, then you start getting half of my email is spam that I doubt I've ever used any of these services, but somehow they got my information. So anyway, I think we're kind of going off on a tangent, but
A little bit.
as usual. But I think that these larger trends, not only industry trends, but trends within the world, are things that as we as IAM practitioners, we're trying to make our business case. We need to help non practitioners understand the threat landscape. What's at risk? It's okay to bring it back to that bigger conversation. This is what's happening in the world. This is what the cyber attack landscape looks like. It's not all fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's and you don't want to go there. You want to make it realistic, and you really want to talk about these are the impacts that are taking place.
Yeah, and I think one thing is you have to remember is that not everyone in the IAM space, the people that you may be talking to may not be as familiar with IAM. So
That's right. Even if
going
they're
in and
IT
having
people.
yeah, they may or may not even be IT people, right? Being able to communicate that in a way that makes sense and that people can understand, I think, is a key part of that strategy, right? How do you communicate what is you trying to do and why it's important?
Yep. I agree. So, kind of, I think, when it comes to IAM strategy, you're going to have some of these big ideas. You're going to have some other ideas that I haven't talked about. And then the question becomes, then what? Well, you have to kind of turn it into your story. What is your story? What is that outline? And I think the first thing is you need kind of within the walls of your organization or within your realm, whatever that is, you have to be able to tell what is the problem. You have to be able to describe the problem. What would what would you add to that, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, what is the problem? How does it affect the organization specifically, whether it's the users or the business or the strategic initiatives that the business is trying to get done? Why does this problem affect those things? So that
Right.
way that you can have and it has to be clear and concise, right? You don't want to spend an hour talking about the problem. Make it as simple as you can.
Right. I think to kind of expand on the problem, it's also what are the threats that the organization faces? So that's that big idea. What are the things that are happening in the world that pose a threat to the organization? Um, I also think this is one thing that I find very effective when you're kind of telling that story is you don't want to develop your IAM strategy in a dark corner, with a candle and you just write the whole thing up yourself. You want to work with others. This is IAM. We always say IAM has to be run as a program. Well, program implies that there are a lot of people involved, a lot of different parts of the business, and that you're not coming up with this thing on your own. You're not just doing it and people are just, getting a service that you came up with. The idea is that there are other stakeholders. And I think it's important to kind of say who contributed, what were the meetings that what was the process you went through to put together the problem statement or come up with the strategy, who's involved and what was their involvement.
Yeah, I think the key part is knowing who in the organization to collaborate with and bring into the fold to co-present or to be co-sponsor and of that message. I think there's been times where you've had a conversation and you'll hear someone say, well, what does so-and-so think about it? That kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And, one thing that I always hear people talk about with their strategy is that we want to have a strategy with buy-in. I always say, well, I used to struggle with in my mind, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to have buy-in? And the conclusion that I've come to is that for people to buy in, they have to feel like their voice was heard, that they had an opportunity to come to the table, tell their side of the story, and be heard. And then they want to have that validated. So what does that mean? It means you're able to tell them back, this is what we heard you say. So I feel like if you're developing your strategy, you want to make sure that the things that people brought to the table were captured, that they know they were captured, and that they're now addressed by the strategy. And I kind of feel like that's the biggest key is making sure that you bring people to the table, they have their opportunity to be heard, you validate that they're heard, and then you say, and here's how we're going to go about solving your your situation. Now, they still might say, well, I don't like the way you're solving it or something like that. And you can try and work back and forth. And I don't know that there's a cookie cutter answer for how to handle situations like that. But I feel like the quickest way to get to buy-in is that whole process I just talked about with making people feel heard.
Yeah, it's much better for a strategy to come from multiple people and problem statements than it is to come from one. So the more people you can get involved with that, the better. I kind of see it as a political undertaking sometimes within the organization and playing a little bit of Game of Thrones, hopefully with less bloodshed to get things
Hopefully.
done.
Shame,
But if
Jeff. Shame, shame, shame.
hopefully with none of that either. But yeah, I mean, if you've got alliances and you build up relationship with other parts of the organization that can help drive that, and they understand the problem and they are of like mind and want to help solve it. I think that really goes a long way when you can walk into your manager, your director, your VP, your CIO, whoever it may be. If they're hearing it from multiple people and not just one or two, that goes a long way towards proving that your point is valid and helping you get to the next step.
Right. I think that it's like the socialization aspect. I think that, after you've defined the problem, obviously you have to define the solution. And defining the solution is a combination of, okay, technically, here are the people, process, and technology things that we're going to do to solve the problem. But then it's also marrying that up with the benefits. Benefits like what is enabled, what risks are reduced, what costs are avoided or reduced. So things like that. I think that's important.
Now, what
And
now what
then,
if you don't know what the solution is, or there are multiple solutions? How do you handle that?
well, I think you have to go in with a recommendation. So there's various stages of a strategy when you might be early on where you need to bring either your stakeholders or some experts to the table to help define the solution. I think ultimately you need to boil it down to a few options, and then I think before you go to an executive audience, in my experience, you don't want to just go with, hey guys, we came up with three options and we'd like you to tell us which one you want to do. I think that is very poor
Yeah,
in terms of how to approach. I think you need to go through it and say, this is what we want to do. This is the option that we feel is the best option for the organization.
I feel it's kind of like the old math test in school, right? Show your work. So here's the options we have, and here's the one we recommend, and here's why. Right, being able to show the work of your recommendation, I think, goes a long way towards proving the viability of it, and that it makes sense that you've thought logically through the problem, that you've addressed the different components of the problem and tried to account for key variables, those sorts of things. There's always something that may pop up, right, that maybe you didn't think about, and those are things that you'll kind of have to adjust to. But I think if you can show the work of your decision and why you think it's the best one or best option, I think that's a strong way to go into it.
Right, right. And that's I think you're making a great point. I think having that kind of collateral, especially if it's something that within your organization is, as the leadership is trying to pick a portfolio of investments to make in a given year, if you know how they like to do their business benefit analysis, if it's like a break even analysis or something more complicated like net present value or even more simple, but just however they might frame the value of an investment. If you're competing with other investments for those dollars. I think that, you need to learn that aspect of it or work with somebody who can help you within the organization put together that analysis. Beyond the solutions, you have your solution. It's obviously you need to propose a timeline, budget, and resource plan. I think that's key to a strategy. A strategy is different than a vision. Vision is kind of like a picture of where you want to be. A strategy is a plan to get there. So it's a high level plan. It's a strategic level plan, but it's still a plan. And so it maybe isn't like a Gantt chart, but it's a plan, and that plan needs to include things like a timeline, budget, and resource plan.
Yeah, I think
And then,
I think that's a really important thing that you just mentioned is where does strategy fit within vision and a project?
yeah,
You know, it's a strategy is a strategy. It's not going to typically get down to that Gantt level detail, right? Where you have a project plan and 100 rows or 1,000 rows of detailed step-by-step analysis. But there needs to be enough information to be able to guide, okay, here's what we're going to do and the order we're going to do it and roughly when. And then that's when you would start to drill down into a specific project that would be part of that strategic vision. Does that make sense?
yeah, absolutely. Um, just to kind of round this out, it's kind of what. So I feel like when you're at the point that you're presenting this to whoever you're presenting it to, whether it's for example, a human resources team or one of your applications teams or it's to an executive audience, I think you need to wrap up with now here's what's needed from you. That's one of the things that we have with our kickoff deck, right? We finish off with here's what's needed for you. This, we're gonna come out and do this workshop. Here are the 4 things that we need from you. This is what we want you, the way we want you to prepare and what we're looking for in terms of feedback from you. In terms of like an executive audience, it might be here's the financial and rah support we need. Like working with the HR team, it might be we need you to assign a person to our project team who can be a subject matter expert. Whatever. I think that this is the time is after you present the strategy. Here's what we need from you.
Make it easy to say yes, right?
Yeah, that's a great way. Great one.
I hate to do like the car dealer approach to it, but how do I get you into this car today, right? What do you need? Here's what I need from you: this, and
Right.
this. So we have this. We're a deal. Less skeevy, hopefully, but make it easy for people to agree. You've got a plan. Here's what we need to execute it. Let's go. Say
I would
yes.
imagine you're a Tesla owner. When you went in to buy a Tesla, it's either like you're either here to buy one or get the heck out of my dealership. There's a line of people who want them.
Dealership. That's so old. You just go on the website and you buy it now. That's how it works.
Is that how you bought it on the website? Okay, wow.
Yeah. I mean, you can
There
go
you
into
go.
a dealer, but it's the new way. I mean, you don't haggle on prices on those types of cars. You don't have to because they are what they are. Um,
Yeah.
There's
You got to
obviously.
remember, Jeff. I still put gas in my car.
I remember that time.
All right. So the last thing, which I'm gonna guess that you're gonna agree with, is how will IAM be run as a program rather than as a project?
No way. That's not true. You should always run it as individual projects with no cohesion or any linkage or strategy at all. Just let people do
And
what they
no plan on what to do after it's implemented.
want. Plans for management.
Yeah. So that's sarcasm, folks. Yeah. I mean, so really, I feel like this is something that gets overlooked. There's such a passion around or such an angst around. We just need to get this piece funded, and I'm telling you, you'd be better off not getting it funded than having it run as a project and then without a proper plan to pick it up at the end, make sure that it runs. You don't want to just throw technology out there without a people, process, and technology plan for how to run it, how to improve it over time. Something
Yeah.
that should be planned for up front.
That's how stopgap solutions come into being. You're thinking tactically and you're trying to solve a specific problem and not being part of the larger collective groupthink to solve, the bigger problem or the root problem. So I totally agree with that. IAM is a program. It is for life until we no longer have identities to manage. When the board maybe takes over and we're all just numbers, even then there's still going to be some identity management. But the organization really needs to understand that. I think there's sometimes organizations say, okay, well, this is like a 3-year project. It might be a 3-year project to get it started, right, and to get maybe the plumbing and the foundations in place and kind of get to a spot where you're managing identity better. But if you're planning on shutting down the program after 3 years, that's not the right way to look at it, and you're just going to be wasting money at that point.
Yep, couldn't agree more. So that's all I have for today, Jeff. I think it's time to work like heck all week and get ready for Thanksgiving and take a little bit of time off. I think before that we should record a What I'm Thankful For podcast and then enjoy a little bit of time with our loved ones.
I think that sounds like a plan. I think what would be cool is if we hear from some folks that are out there listening, what are the things that they're thankful for from an IAM perspective? You can send those to questions@identityatthecenter.com. Jim and I read each and every one that comes through. Thank you to the folks who email us, and curious to see what people out there think. What are some things that they've come across that they're thankful for? It could be something recent or maybe just in general, preferably with an identity and access management spin to make it relevant. But maybe it's this podcast. So a little bit of self promotion there.
Oh yeah, Jeff. I'm sure somebody is going to be at the Thanksgiving table next week and saying, "I'm thankful for the Identity at the Center podcast."
So is that like what we would hear at either of our Thanksgiving tables next week?
I think that's the only place you're going to hear it.
Well, one can dream. All right. Well, I think we had a good conversation for today. Talked about creating the IAM strategy. As always, appreciate folks who are listening. You can always get a hold of us at questions@identityatthecenter.com, and we'll talk to you in the next one.
You've been listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. To access all episodes, visit identityatthecenter.com.